A big thank you to Squarespace for sponsoring this week's video. If you need a website or a domain, go to squarespace.com/James for 10% off your first purchase. Hello everybody, hope you're all well. A few weeks ago I bought this lens, which is a 35mm f1.4 from Sony. And I mentioned I'd done so on my Instagram stories, and a few people said, "What on earth have you done that for? That's ridiculous." And predominantly the reason they said that was that for a lot of people, landscape photography is quite like a prescriptive endeavour. Basically, you go somewhere with a nice view, you put your tripod up, you stick your camera on top of that tripod with a wide-angle lens attached, set that lens to f16, shoot at the base ISO, and hope that you get everything in focus. And if you don't, then you focus stack, and that represents landscape photography. And I think that's absolutely fine, but I also think that shallow depth of field is one of the best tools we have as photographers for storytelling. So this week I went to South Stack Lighthouse, which I last visited in January of this year when conditions were epic, and I decided to shoot exclusively the f1.4 as I did a couple of months ago in another video. And actually that's not true, I also use my 20mm that I'm filming this on right now, and that only goes to f1.8. And I also used, as you'll see, my 70-200, which only goes to f2.8. But I shot wide open on all my lenses. And I don't know if I made any kind of point with what I shot, but I had a lot of fun. So here's how I got on. Right then, I don't want to speak too soon, but I think we might get super lucky here. As you can see out to sea where the sun is going to set over there in just over an hour's time, there is no cloud at all. But above me, see if I can show you, there's kind of dispersed high cloud and it's heading out to sea. So long as it doesn't catch the setting sun, I think hopefully it'll all glow. I might have just jinxed it though. The thing is, as you know, like when you're making a video, you have to think about everything other than photography so much.
Oh, I know exactly what you mean.
It's such a pain, yeah. I've just bumped into John, who has seen some of the videos, and he has a YouTube channel too, so I'll link him. We've got a treat tonight, I think. Well, what's epic about huts like that is they make for fantastic framing tools when you're using shallow depth of field, because you can throw them out of focus so they're not distracting for your subject, which in this case is obviously the lighthouse. But, as I say, they work brilliant as a frame, even if they're completely out of focus. So that worked pretty well. But now I'm going to shoot down here, because last time I was here, as I mentioned in January, I was shooting sort of up further by the hut really, and the other side of the hut, because the sun was setting kind of over there. And now that was over 3 months ago. As you can see, the sun is now going to set on this side of the lighthouse. So I think the staircase leading down to the lighthouse will give me some more opportunities for half decent shots, I think. Could be wrong, but let's at least go and find out. My word, I don't know if you can hear these birds down here. They're making a right racket. Right, first off, apologies for the shadow of the tripod in this clip. You can imagine how much that pains me. But this is quite a nice scene, I think. And you've got these wildflowers in the foreground and then the building in the background. I can't be more specific than that. I don't know what it is. Now, if I was to shoot this at f16, I think you'd get a reasonably pleasant shot. 2/3 of a stop underexposed to protect the whites of the building. You get that. But the trouble is, as you might be able to tell, that there are patches of dirt around the wildflowers, and that foreground is actually just a bit messy. I mean, it's nice enough to be included as a foreground, but I don't think it's nice enough to be included in focus. So at f1.4, I think we're going to get a slightly better result. Let's have a go. Yeah, I think that's a bit nicer. I don't know that that's really the best example of what shallow depth of field can can do for your image. So here's one from Newborough a couple of videos ago, and I think this displays my point much better. So the whole point, as far as I'm concerned, of using shallow depth of field is that you can include stuff within your image that doesn't distract from the subject. So it tells you more about your scene without throwing your focus away from what you should be looking at. And in fact, on top of not distracting you, sometimes it can help draw attention to your subject. So here, for example, you've got these two strands of grass and the moon in between them. And it's slightly embarrassing just how many shots it took me to achieve that, but I think it works quite well. And likewise, a lot of these strands of grass are pointing towards the boat and the lighthouse. And I think they give you a much deeper sense of what's happening in the scene than if they weren't there. And if they were there but in focus, I think they'd throw your attention away from the subject. So I think this is a much better example of what I'm trying to talk about. Yeah.
Okay, this is a wider angle shot, so I'm going to use the 20 as opposed to the 35. And what's tricky with the 20 is that because it's a wider lens, the stuff you want to throw out of focus has to be closer, basically. So I'm going to try and use this wall to emphasise the shallow depth of field. Something like this. I think that might look quite nice. Maybe something from here too. Although I'll get down a little bit lower to make sure that this banister doesn't get in the way of those wildflowers down here. So something like from here. So I'll go at that. Don't want to include massive amounts of the sky because currently there's nothing going on in the sky. These clouds are kind of dispersing before they get anywhere near the horizon, which might mean it's going to be a little bit less dramatic of a sunset than I thought initially. But that's okay. Now, I'm a little bit conscious that by way of making this video, I sound like I'm being negative about all conventional landscape photography advice, and I don't mean that to be the case. Despite the fact that I hate tripods, I think most photography advice, landscape photography advice, is very sensible, including constant talk of leading lines, which I think maybe gets a bit overused. But here, well, I think there's an option, or a couple of options, with this banister. Yeah, that one. Right, well, there's a few shots here. This banister works brilliantly as a leading line to the lighthouse, as does this wall, to be honest. Something like... And again, even at 20mm, you're getting just enough of a shallow depth of field to know immediately where your eye is supposed to be looking, and that's the lighthouse. So the leading line helps, but the shallow depth of field helps take your eye to the lighthouse too. Okay, well, the light is starting to soften just a touch. We are, well, 5 minutes, something like that, from sunset, and I'm conscious of going too much lower because I don't want the lighthouse to break the horizon. So I've just put the telephoto on to get a nice shot of the lighthouse and nothing else, maybe with the pastels in the background. Obviously I won't be shooting at f1.4 with my 70-200, but I will shoot at f2.8 to kind of continue the theme. And doing so gives us something like this. Not quite as exotic as f1.4, but still nice. Get a shot of the sun as well. A little bit away from the theme of the video, but actually f2.8 in terms of depth of field at 70 or 135 is very similar to f1.4 at 35mm. I'm guessing a little bit there, but roughly.
Going on to photo pills, turns out I was completely wrong. So at 70mm, 200 meters away at f2.8, the near plane is 45 meters, and at 135mm it's just over 100 meters, whereas at 35mm f1.4 it's 25 meters. So I was completely wrong. Quite a useful tool, this though.
Okay then, first blue hour shot, and I'm going 20mm. It's basically the white building that we're yet to name. Amazing clouds up above it, and these layers of cliffs dropping down into the water down there, which is, despite the fact there's no swell, causing a bit of kind of white water. I mean, not a huge amount of white water, is it really? But I've mentioned it now. Well, this is where really fast lenses tend to come into their own, when it when it goes dark. And right now I can shoot at, let's have a look, 250th of a second at ISO 100, and it's basically dark. Now, I'm not too fussed this time of day about foreground interest anymore because there's no light shining on it, so everything in the foreground is basically just dark. What I am interested in is waiting to see if a flock of birds flies through that pink sky past the lighthouse. Although the amount of my life I've waited for things like that to happen is not good. One last shot of this building I don't know the name of. And now I'm going to go back up towards that hut because I'm dissatisfied with Blue Hour so far. Don't ask me why. I like the look of this telegraph pole. Let's shoot that quickly.
Yes, so there we have it. There were some photos shot wide open, landscape photos, and I think largely they worked quite well. A word on shooting wide open though, I'm very lucky to have very good quality lenses. I mean, this lens wide open is absolutely ridiculously sharp. And actually, the same goes for my 70-200 at F2.8. The sharpness, wide open, it's unbelievable. And not all lenses are like that. If you pick up a very cheap 50mm lens and it can shoot f1.8, chances are at f1.8 it won't be particularly sharp. So that is often something to bear in mind if you're hoping to shoot wide open, is that you often won't get the best optical performance wide open unless you spend a lot of money on lenses, which I can do because it's my job. But yeah, that's worth noting, I suppose. And the other thing I would say about shooting wide open is that a lot when it comes to landscape photography depends on the focal length. And so for instance, if you're shooting at 135mm at f1.8, that's not particularly useful in lots of circumstances for landscape photography because hardly anything is in focus. So if you're shooting in Blue Hour, for instance, and you've got an f1.8 lens, shooting at 135mm, there are probably quite a few use cases for that. However, the reverse of that is that at 20mm, so this lens, if I'm shooting at f1.8, then providing my subject is 10 meters away or over, then everything behind my subject will be in focus, which means in Blue Hour, I can shoot with this lens wide open, knowing that pretty much everything is still in focus. And I don't think people really appreciate that. I think a lot of the time, regardless of focal length, people think you need to be shooting at f8 or f11 to have lots of stuff in focus. But if you've got a wide angle lens, it's not the case. Anyway, yes, hopefully that was interesting. I also made another video this week, just a midweek editing tips video, so I'll link that in the description. And a big thank you also to the sponsor of this week's video, Squarespace. So if you're a photographer or a designer or a mechanic or a cook or anybody who makes anything and you want to show your work to the world, Squarespace is a fantastic solution. So perhaps you've got a portfolio or a blog, maybe you want an online store, maybe you want to send newsletters. In any case, Squarespace has got you covered and you don't need any technical knowledge at all. I've used Squarespace for well over 5 years now. I don't know a single line of code and I've never had to. Lots of Squarespace is drag and drop. It's incredibly customizable, and even someone like me can do it. So if you're looking to showcase your work online, I wouldn't look any further than Squarespace, and you can check out Squarespace with a free trial by going to squarespace.com. And after that, if you'd like to make a purchase, just go to squarespace.com/James and you'll get 10% off your first purchase. So a big thank you to Squarespace for the continued support of this channel, and thank you to you for watching. Hopefully it was interesting. And I shall be going back to South Stack soon, I think, because I love that location. Although next time I'll probably allow myself a few more aperture options. It's not ideal for everything, but my point is it works quite well for some stuff.